Imagine a night when the world turns white and the wind itself sounds like it's crying for help. In the middle of that storm, a lone veteran hears a bark echoing through the snow, a bark that will lead him to a secret buried deep in the mountains, and a rescue that will change everything he thought he'd lost. This is not just a story about survival. It's about faith, loyalty, and the light we find in the darkest storms. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and what reminds you that hope still lives, even when the world goes silent. The town of Fairhaven, Alaska, lay buried beneath a roaring sea of snow. February had arrived with a vengeance. Its winds howled like wounded wolves across the mountains, whipping through pine forests that stood as black silhouettes against a silver-white sky. The blizzard swallowed sound and sight alike, turning the world into a trembling blur of frost and fear. In a small, isolated hunting cabin on the northern ridge, Ethan Cole sat by a dying fire, patching an old rifle by lamplight. Ethan was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered skin tanned by sun and scarred by shrapnel. His hair, once dark brown, was now flecked with gray, and a faint limp marked his steps, a souvenir from a battlefield long ago. Once a Navy corpsman, Ethan had seen more than his share of men die, and something inside him had grown quiet after that. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and lived alone among the mountains because they did not ask questions. Only one creature shared his silence. Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a sable and cream coat and eyes the color of molten amber. Rex was trained, disciplined, but above all, loyal. Ethan had rescued him as a pup from a burned K-9 unit years ago, and the two had become mirror images of each other, both scarred survivors of wars no one spoke about anymore. The radio crackled on the shelf, coughing static and broken words about a statewide blizzard warning. Ethan adjusted the antenna, but the wind outside shrieked louder, drowning out the transmission. He sighed, tossed another log into the fire, and reached for his coffee mug. That was when Rex's ears pricked up, rigid, alert. The dog's head turned sharply toward the door, nostrils flaring. "Easy, boy," Ethan muttered, but the shepherd gave a low growl, then barked, once, twice, before lunging to the door. His tail stiffened, hackles raised. Something was out there. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and rifle, pulled on his heavy parka, and followed Rex into the storm. The wind struck him like knives, blinding and cold, but Rex moved ahead with purpose, nose low, weaving through the drifts. The snow was already knee-deep, swallowing the narrow path that wound along the ridge. Then Ethan saw it, a faint, flickering red light in the distance, pulsing weakly like the heartbeat of something dying. He stumbled closer and realized it was the rear light of an overturned police SUV, half buried in the snow at the bottom of a ravine. "Rex, stay close," he shouted over the wind and slid down the slope, grabbing at rocks and branches to keep his balance. The truck's windshield was shattered, its roof crushed inward. The sound of the wind mixed with something else, a soft whimpering. Ethan wrenched open the driver's side door and froze. A woman was trapped inside, her wrists cuffed to the steering wheel, blood running down from her temple. Her uniform badge, half torn, read Grace Monroe. She looked to be in her early 30s, slender but strong, with dark hair matted by blood and snow. Her face was pale but determined even in unconsciousness, a face that had once known authority, now marked by exhaustion and betrayal. Her right hand was bruised purple, her cheekbone cut deep, as if someone had struck her before the crash. Rex whined, nudging something in the back seat. Ethan turned his flashlight there, and his chest tightened. 3 tiny German shepherd puppies, barely a few weeks old, huddled together under a torn blanket, shivering violently. Their breath was shallow, eyes half closed, one of them barely moving. "Hang on, sweetheart," Ethan murmured as he cut the seatbelt with his knife and freed Grace's hands. The cuffs clattered to the floor. He didn't ask why a police officer was chained inside her own vehicle. Questions could wait. Lives could not. He wrapped Grace's wrists in his scarf to stop the bleeding, lifted her from the wreck, then scooped the puppies into his coat pocket. Rex trotted beside him, pressing close for warmth as they began the climb back up the slope. Every step was a battle, the snow giving way beneath his boots, the wind howling in his ears, Grace limp in his arms. Halfway up, he nearly slipped, but Rex braced himself against Ethan's leg, growling softly as if urging him forward. The dog's eyes glowed like embers through the storm. Together, they moved, man and beast, until the faint outline of the cabin appeared through the veil of snow. Inside, Ethan laid Grace by the fire. Her breathing was shallow, her lips blue. He quickly stripped off her wet jacket, wrapped her in blankets, and checked for fractures. Years of field medic training guided his hands, steady, precise. Her pulse was weak, but there. Rex sat near the hearth, warming the puppies. The largest one, with a small white mark on its chest, whimpered faintly. Ethan gently rubbed its sides until it let out a tiny bark. The other two stirred, pressing against Rex's fur for heat. Grace stirred slightly, mumbling through cracked lips. Ethan leaned closer. "The babies. They're fine," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, gray-green, sharp even through the haze of pain. Who are you?" "Ethan Cole, just someone who hates bad weather," he replied dryly. "And you're bleeding. Don't move." He poured warm water into a bowl, cleaned her wounds, and applied a makeshift bandage. Her left wrist had deep bruises, the kind caused by metal restraints tightened too hard. He frowned, but said nothing. Hours passed. The storm outside battered the cabin without mercy. The roof groaned under the weight of snow, the windows fogged with frost. Yet inside, the room glowed with soft amber light, the fire crackling, the scent of pine smoke filling the air. Grace slept, Rex kept guard, and Ethan sat watching the flames, lost in thought. There was something about this woman that stirred, an old ache in him, the kind that came from seeing another soul trying to survive the impossible. He remembered his last mission overseas, the night everything went wrong, and the faces of those he couldn't save. He'd sworn never to get involved again. But here she was, battered, hunted, and somehow surrounded by life in its most fragile form. 3 newborns and a loyal mother dog who wouldn't stop staring at him as if asking him to protect what she loved. When he looked at Rex, the shepherd tilted his head, almost in understanding. "Yeah," Ethan whispered. "I know what you're thinking. We can't just walk away from this one." The fire crackled louder, as if agreeing. Outside, the blizzard raged on, a white fury screaming across the mountains. But within the small cabin, something different took hold, a fragile warmth that pushed back against the cold. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone. He sat down near the fire, adjusting the logs. The light flickered across Grace's face, softening the bruises. One of the puppies gave a weak squeak, and Rex nuzzled it closer to his belly. The old shepherd's eyes met Ethan's, steady, patient, full of silent faith. When the clock struck midnight, Ethan stood, staring at the storm through the frosted window. "Let it blow," he murmured. "We'll make it through the night." Behind him, Grace exhaled a trembling breath and slipped into deeper sleep. The snow outside swallowed every sound except one, the steady rhythmic crackle of fire and the low hum of life slowly returning. And in that lonely cabin, surrounded by storm and silence, 4 hearts, 2 human, 2 canine, began a quiet battle for survival. The night stretched on, endless and white, but the bark that had begun this stormy night had led to something Ethan hadn't felt in years: purpose. Morning came slow to Fairhaven, though the storm outside hadn't truly stopped. The snow had thinned into drifting curtains, lazy flakes twisting like ghosts between the pines. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, but steady. A faint scent of pine resin and smoke filled the air. Ethan sat beside the hearth, his rifle within reach, eyes fixed on the woman still unconscious on the couch. Grace Monroe, 32, looked less like an officer and more like a fallen soldier. Beneath the blanket, she trembled, not from cold, but from the shock still gripping her body. Her face bore the harsh truth of the night before. The bruised jawline, the deep cut on her temple, the faint handprints on her wrist where the metal cuffs had bit into her skin. Even sleeping, her expression was one of resistance, as if she was still fighting some invisible force. Ethan poured warm water into a basin, dipped a clean cloth, and pressed it gently to her forehead. He'd done this 1,000 times in field tents across oceans, but there was something different now. The silence around them wasn't war, it was exile, and yet the instinct to save remained. At the fireplace, Rex lifted his head. His fur shimmered in the light, sable with streaks of gold near the shoulders, thickened by the cold. Around him, the 3 puppies stirred beneath a folded blanket. One, the smallest, with a faint red mark around its neck, let out a thin yelp. Ethan smiled faintly. "You hungry, little one?" He poured some warm milk into a shallow tin and set it beside them. Rex sniffed, then nudged the puppies closer, the kind of fatherly gesture that made Ethan's chest tighten. There was gentleness in the old shepherd that no human could quite imitate. Then Grace moaned. Her eyelids fluttered, breath ragged. She tried to sit up, but pain forced her back down. Her eyes opened, glazed with confusion. Where am I?" Ethan leaned forward. "You're safe. Cabin off Fairhaven Ridge. You crashed during the storm." She blinked at him, trying to focus. "The truck? Gone. You were lucky. I found you cuffed to the wheel." Her gaze sharpened a little. "You saw the cuffs? Hard to miss." For a moment silence stretched between them, heavy as the wind outside. Grace's jaw clenched, a flicker of shame, or perhaps fear, crossing her face. Then she looked toward the fireplace, where the puppies were gathered against Rex's chest. Her eyes softened. "They're alive?" "Barely, but the old man here's keeping them warm," Ethan said, giving Rex a pat. Grace smiled faintly, just enough to make Ethan realize she must have once smiled easily. But the expression vanished as quickly as it came. She reached a trembling hand to touch the bruises on her wrist. "I remember lights behind me, someone shouting. Then, nothing." "You were beaten before the crash," Ethan said quietly. "More than once." Her eyes darted toward him, guarded. "You sound sure." "I've seen those marks before. Doesn't look like an accident." He studied her, not with suspicion, but the calm watchfulness of someone used to reading danger in faces. "You want to tell me who did it?" Grace hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. I don't even know if it's safe to say his name." Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. "Fair enough. But if someone's coming for you, I need to know what kind of storm I'm sheltering here." She let out a hollow laugh that turned into a cough. "The kind that doesn't stop when the snow does." He passed her a mug of warm water. "Drink. You've lost blood." Grace obeyed, her hands shaking slightly. She looked around the cabin, the maps on the wall, the stack of canned food, the neat organization of a man who'd lived alone too long. "You military?" she asked finally. "Used to be. Corpsman, Navy." "That explains the bedside manners." He gave a faint smirk. "You're not the first person I've pulled back from the edge." Grace's eyes met his then, truly met them. For a heartbeat, something passed between them, recognition perhaps. 2 people who knew what it meant to lose and keep going anyway. She lowered her gaze to the fire. "I was investigating internal corruption," she said slowly. "Trafficking, bribery, federal contracts, someone high up. Then the wrong people found out. I was supposed to hand over evidence today." Her voice trembled. "Instead, they handed me over to death." Ethan's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. "Someone from your unit?" She nodded. "Victor Harlan, captain. Everyone trusted him. I did too, until he locked me in the cruiser and drove it off the road." The wind outside moaned, as though echoing her words. Ethan stood and paced once, absorbing the story. "You've got guts, Officer Monroe." Grace's lips curved bitterly. "Courage doesn't mean much when your own team calls you crazy." He crouched beside her, checked the bandage on her temple. "You'll live, but if he's half the threat you say, we'll need a plan." Rex barked suddenly, low and sharp. Both turned toward the door. Ethan crossed the room, lifted the curtain, and peered through the frost-streaked window. Nothing, only snow and the faint outline of trees. He waited, listening. Then the sound came, a distant engine hum, fading fast. Snowmobiles, 2, maybe 3. He let the curtain drop. "Search parties," he muttered. Grace's face went pale. "They'll say I'm missing in action, mentally unstable. They'll have orders to shoot if I resist." Ethan grabbed his parka and opened a crate beside the door, pulling out a flare gun, binoculars, and a battered radio transceiver. "I've got some old military frequencies still open. I'll try to reach someone off-grid." As he adjusted the dials, static filled the air. Then, a faint female voice broke through. This is Federal Ops Relay 9. Identify yourself. Ethan pressed the transmitter. This is Ethan Cole, ex-Navy corpsman, ID 4F47N. I've got a wounded officer, Grace Monroe, survivor of a wrecked police vehicle, possible internal corruption, multiple hostiles pursuing. Silence. Then, Ethan, this is Dana Reeves. He blinked. Dana, you're still in ops? Still cleaning up after you, Cole? She replied dryly. Her tone shifted, professional. I'll alert the Bureau, but you need to hold position. Weather's closing in again. Can you keep them alive for 24 hours? Ethan's eyes flicked to Grace, then to the puppies now asleep by the fire. I can. Good. I'll find you. The signal cut off. He turned back to Grace. Help's coming, but we can't let anyone see smoke or light tonight. We bunker down. Grace nodded, still weak but determined. Tell me what to do. Rest. That's an order. She laughed softly. You don't get to give orders anymore, sailor. Old habits die hard. The moment almost felt normal, two strangers sharing tired humor in the face of chaos. Then Rex barked again, this time sharply, and one of the puppies squeaked. Ethan grabbed his rifle. Stay down. He opened the door a crack. Snow whipped inside, cold and blinding. For a long moment he listened, then saw a dark figure moving through the trees. Not close, but too deliberate to be a hiker. He shut the door, slid the bolt across. We've got company out there. He's scouting the ridge. Grace's hand went instinctively to the holster at her belt, empty. Ethan tossed her a small revolver. It's old but reliable. Don't shoot unless you have to. Sound carries. She caught it, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her body. You trust easily? I trust what the storm gave me, he said simply. Hours passed under the weight of silence. The fire burned low again. Rex didn't move from his post by the door. Grace finally drifted into uneasy sleep, the gun resting under her hand. Ethan sat awake through the night, his mind circling the same thought. Why had he stepped out into the storm at all? Maybe because some part of him, the part that had refused to die overseas, had recognized that bark for what it was, a call for purpose. As dawn crept back across the frozen forest, the first golden light brushed against the windowpane. Ethan looked at it and felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him, hope, faint but alive. Behind him, Grace whispered in her sleep, Don't let them take the dogs. I won't, Ethan murmured. Not while I'm breathing. Outside, the blizzard began again, sealing them within the mountains, but this time, the fire inside the cabin burned stronger than before. The third morning broke beneath a pale, icy sky. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape carved from silence. Snow draped over the pine branches like a burial shroud, and the air hung still, brittle as glass. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to a low ember, casting just enough warmth to remind the living they were still alive. Ethan woke first, as always. Years of military habit had trained him to rise before dawn, because in his world, those who slept too long often didn't wake at all. He stood by the frosted window, mug in hand, scanning the tree line for movement. Nothing but the quiet shimmer of ice. Behind him, Grace Monroe stirred on the couch. Her face had regained some color, though the shadows under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and memories that refused to fade. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around her. I keep dreaming of sirens, she murmured, her voice rough from disuse. Every time I wake, I think I'm still in that car. Ethan turned. You're not. The only thing out there now is cold. She smiled faintly at that. You always talk like that, half soldier, half philosopher. Depends on who's listening, he said. By the fireplace, Rex shifted. The big German shepherd had barely slept since the crash, his golden brown eyes constantly tracking every sound outside. He lay curled around the three puppies, his breath forming small clouds of vapor in the cold air. The smallest pup, the one with the reddish collar, had grown stronger. It wriggled clumsily across the floorboards and bumped against Grace's boot. She bent down, lifting the tiny creature into her hands. The pup licked her thumb, its eyes bright with unsteady life. Grace's expression softened. You know, she said quietly, this one shouldn't even be alive. We found them abandoned in an old storage unit 2 weeks ago. Mother nowhere to be found. I took them in until we could place them with the K-9 program. She hesitated, fingers brushing the red collar around the pup's neck. But I had another reason. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Go on. Grace looked up at him, cautious, calculating, as if weighing whether trust could survive another storm. Finally, she sighed. When I realized Harlan was onto me, I had to hide the evidence. Couldn't risk keeping it in the department servers or my apartment, so I encrypted everything. Transaction logs, offshore accounts, internal messages. Then I embedded it here. She tapped the small red collar. Micro SD card, sealed inside the lining. It's got enough to bury Harlan and half his network. Ethan frowned. You were carrying the evidence on a dog? Sometimes the safest place is the one nobody thinks to search. Her lips curved into a grim smile. He thought I was desperate. Maybe I was, but I wasn't stupid. Ethan crouched beside her, studying the collar. It looked ordinary. Worn leather, hand-sewn edges, a small brass clasp dulled with age. But beneath one seam, he noticed a faint stitch out of place. He used his pocket knife to lift the edge, just enough to see the glint of metal. Smart, he muttered. But now that they know you're alive, they'll want it back. Grace nodded. He'll send his men. Probably already has. Ethan rose, retrieving a small military-grade lockbox from the shelf, a relic from his deployment years. He opened it, revealing a foam-lined interior and a small key. Then this goes in here, he said, taking the collar gently. No one touches it till we hand it to the feds. He locked the box, tucked it beneath a floorboard, and pressed the plank back in place. Rex watched him the whole time, ears flicking. Grace studied him for a long moment. You trust the Bureau that much? Ethan met her eyes. No, but I trust Dana Reeves. She was the one who dragged me out of Hellman when the world went to hell. She'll come through. Grace looked down at the sleeping puppies. I used to believe that about my captain. Believing in the wrong people doesn't mean you stop believing altogether, Ethan said, his voice quiet. The silence between them settled like snow, soft but heavy. The fire cracked once, startling the smallest pup. Rex nuzzled it closer, letting out a low whine that almost sounded like reassurance. Grace smiled faintly. Rex, right? How old? 5. Seen more war than most men I know. He seems calmer than you. Ethan smirked. He's got better instincts. She laughed, light, unguarded, the first true sound of warmth since the storm began. But it vanished quickly when Rex's ears snapped up, head turning toward the door. His muscles tensed, a low growl building in his throat. Ethan froze. What is it, boy? Rex moved to the window, tail stiff, gaze fixed on the ridge beyond the tree line. Ethan joined him, raising his binoculars. At first, he saw nothing but white. Then, a flicker of movement. A man in snow gear, standing too still for a hiker. Binoculars glinted briefly in his hand before he disappeared behind a tree. Damn, Ethan muttered. We've been spotted. Grace's heart began to pound. Is it them? Has to be. Nobody wanders out here unless they've got a reason. He pulled down the blackout curtains and doused the fire until only embers glowed. The room dimmed into amber shadows. We stay quiet, he whispered. They'll try to confirm the sighting before moving in. That gives us a window. Grace nodded, clutching the revolver he'd given her the night before. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You don't seem surprised. Not my first ambush, he said, but I'm tired of losing people. She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment saw through the armor he wore like skin, the man who'd once saved lives in sand and blood, now saving them in snow and silence. Time crawled. The only sound was the faint breathing of the dogs. Then came the crunch of distant boots on ice, faint, methodical, moving closer. Ethan motioned for silence and slipped toward the door. He peered through the narrow crack between planks. The figure emerged again, closer now. A man in tactical gear, face covered, rifle slung low. Another shadow moved behind him. Ethan whispered, 2 minimum, maybe more behind the ridge. Grace's hand tightened on the gun. If they find us, they won't, not yet. He signaled Rex to guard the puppies and moved toward the back wall, where a small crawl space led to a snow-covered trench, an escape route he'd dug during hunting seasons. He whispered to Grace, If I tell you to run, take the pups and go through here. Follow the trench to the creek bed. I'm not leaving you. This isn't up for debate. But before she could argue, the crunching stopped. The forest fell deathly still. A raven shrieked somewhere in the distance, then even that sound faded. Ethan exhaled slowly. They're waiting, watching, trying to make us panic. Grace swallowed hard. They know I have it. He looked at her. Then they don't know it's gone. Hours later, when darkness fell again, the figures withdrew. Ethan stayed alert long after their tracks disappeared into the tree line. Only then did he allow himself to light the fire again, carefully shielding the glow. Grace sat nearby, holding the smallest pup. Sable, she whispered, naming it softly. Because she's the color of Rex, she explained. Ethan glanced over. That's a good name. Grace smiled faintly. She reminds me of what I used to be, small, terrified, but too stubborn to die. He poured her a mug of warm coffee. Stubborn keeps you alive. It's the one virtue we share. As night deepened, the two sat in silence. The only sound the crackle of fire and the faint whimper of sleeping pups. Outside, the snow began again, not fierce this time, but quiet and steady, blanketing the tracks that led to the cabin. Ethan watched through the window as flakes drifted down, erasing all signs of pursuit. Looks like the mountains decided to keep our secret, he said. Grace leaned back, exhaustion softening her features. Then, maybe we'll live long enough to see the sun again. Rex raised his head, gave a single low bark, and lay down beside them. The warmth from the fire wrapped around the small group like a promise, a fragile one, but real. In that moment, they were not fugitives or ghosts of failed missions. They were a pack, bound not by orders or law, but by the silent agreement of survivors. And somewhere beneath the cabin floor, sealed inside a red collar, the truth waited, ready to burn the corrupt and save the faithful once the snow finally melted. By the fourth dawn, Fairhaven's wilderness had returned to its deceptive stillness. The storm had cleared, but not the danger. The world outside looked pure, almost holy, miles of untouched snow shimmering beneath the faint glow of an Arctic sunrise. Yet under that serenity hid the quiet breath of hunters. Ethan Cole stood by the frosted window, scanning the tree line through his binoculars. His jaw was unshaven, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. The air inside the cabin was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and fear. He'd counted 3 men the night before, trained, methodical, not locals. Whoever led them knew what he was doing. Behind him, Grace Monroe knelt beside the fire, wrapping a bandage around her wrist. The bruises were fading, but the anger beneath them wasn't. Her dark hair, now tied back, revealed a determined face hardened by survival. The woman who had once trusted her badge now trusted only instinct. Rex sat by the door, head high, ears pricked. The German shepherd's fur shimmered gold in the light of dawn, his breath fogging the air. Every so often, he turned to nudge one of the puppies. Sable, the smallest, was now strong enough to waddle a few steps before collapsing beside her siblings. Ethan lowered the binoculars and set them aside. "They're here," he said quietly. Grace looked up. "How close?" "Close enough to smell the fire. They've built camp a quarter-mile north, probably pretending to be a search team." She frowned. "Harlan's men." He nodded. "He's smart. He'll come under the flag of rescue with papers, radios, maybe even a sheriff's badge. By the time the feds arrive, we'll be ghosts." Grace stared into the fire. "I should have expected this. I always knew he'd bury anyone who got in his way." "You're not buried yet," Ethan said, checking his rifle, "and I don't plan to let him finish the job." Grace looked up, studying him. "You've done this before, haven't you? The hiding, the waiting, the killing, if it comes to that." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He moved to the shelf, pulled down a small case, and opened it to reveal a satellite transceiver. Old, battered, but functional. "Back when people still thought wars had endings," he said at last. "They don't. They just change uniforms." He turned the dial, tuning to an encrypted frequency. Static filled the cabin, then a faint, familiar voice cut through. "Ethan, this is Agent Dana Reeves. I'm reading you. Copy?" "Loud and clear," Ethan replied. "Status? 1 wounded officer stable. 3 K9 pups alive. Hostiles confirmed in proximity. 3 minimum, led by Victor Harlan." A pause. "We have warrants out for Harlan and his known associates. Your location?" Ethan read the coordinates from his map. Fairhaven Ridge, 2 clicks north of Deadwater Creek. "Copy that. Storm delayed airlift. Closest extraction." Window, 24 hours. Can you hold until then? Ethan's gaze drifted toward the door, where Rex was already growling at something unseen. We'll manage, he said. Understood. Keep your head down, Cole. I'll bring you home this time. The line went dead. Grace exhaled slowly. So we just wait? We wait smart, Ethan said. I'll rig motion traps along the ridge. You stay with the dogs. If something happens, you take them through the escape tunnel and head east to the frozen stream. Stay low, follow the ravine until you see the burnt pine. From there, it's 2 miles to the ranger station. Grace nodded, though her eyes flickered with defiance. You're assuming I'll run? I'm assuming you'll live, he said, grabbing his parka and stepping out into the blinding light. The cold hit like a hammer. Ethan trudged through knee-deep snow, his breath sharp in the freezing air. He moved quickly, planting signal wires between trees, using branches and broken bark to conceal traps. It was instinct, an old rhythm his body remembered too well. When he returned an hour later, the wind had risen again, whispering through the pines like a warning. Grace was sitting near the fire, her pistol beside her, the puppies sleeping in her lap. For a moment, the sight almost looked peaceful, like something normal. They're beautiful, aren't they? She said softly. Tiny hearts that don't know the world's cruelty yet. Ethan smiled faintly. They'll learn soon enough. Maybe not, Grace said. Maybe they'll grow up in a world that's a little kinder, because we didn't give up. He said nothing, but there was a glint of agreement in his eyes. Then Rex barked, short, sharp, urgent. Ethan's head snapped toward the window. Through the frost, he saw movement. 3 snowmobiles cutting across the ridge, bright orange rescue markings painted on the sides. Men in reflective jackets, official, convincing, but wrong. Their formation was too tight, their helmets too dark. Stay down, he hissed. The snowmobiles stopped 30 yards from the cabin. The lead man stepped off, his voice carrying across the still air. Hello? Anyone inside? We're search and rescue. Grace's hand trembled on the gun. That's his voice, she whispered. Harlan. Ethan felt his muscles tense. Then let's play along. He cracked the door open, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. Morning, he called, his tone calm. What brings you up the ridge? The man turned, tall, lean, with eyes too cold for a rescuer's. Victor Harlan looked exactly like the type of man who smiled only when others bled. His uniform was spotless, his stance military. He studied Ethan for a long second before speaking. Storm reports said a vehicle went off the road. We're checking for survivors. Found one, Ethan said. Brought her here. She's resting. Harlan's mouth curved slightly. An officer, I assume? That's right. Well, Harlan said, stepping closer. Then I suppose you won't mind if we verify that. Ethan met his gaze. She's hurt. You'll scare her. You can check with the sheriff once you're down the mountain. Harlan's smile didn't reach his eyes. You live alone up here, Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, Harlan repeated. You're a good man for helping, but sometimes good men get caught in the wrong stories. Ethan said nothing, just stared. After a pause, Harlan's tone dropped, softer, almost friendly. If you see her again, or anyone asking questions about me, tell them you found nothing. The mountain swallows secrets faster than any grave. He turned to leave, but his last words lingered like poison in the air. When the snow clears, I'll be back. Maybe we'll share a drink then. The snowmobiles roared to life and vanished into the trees. Ethan watched until the sound faded. Then he closed the door and leaned against it, every muscle trembling with the effort of restraint. Grace stepped from the shadows, her face pale. He knows, she said. He suspects. But we've bought time. Ethan crossed to the radio, keyed the transmitter, and sent a coded message. 3 short bursts, signal distress confirmed, enemy contact imminent. Then he turned to Grace. Pack everything, food, ammo, blankets. We're going below ground until morning. They moved fast. Ethan lifted the floor panel near the back wall, revealing the steel-lined bunker, an old storm shelter reinforced with lead and insulated for heat. He passed the puppies down to Grace, then lowered Rex, who whined softly but obeyed. When everything was ready, Ethan closed the hatch above them. The world went black except for the faint glow of a lantern. In that confined space, every sound was magnified. their breaths, the faint beating of the puppies' hearts, the wind moaning above. Grace sat across from him, holding Sable close. "Do you think they'll attack tonight?" "They'll wait for cover. Another storm's coming. Men like Harlan use weather the way others use camouflage." "And you?" Ethan looked up, his expression calm, resolute. "I use it to survive." For hours they waited in silence. Then, just before midnight, came the sound Ethan had dreaded, a faint metallic click above them. A boot step. Another. Rex growled low in his throat. Ethan whispered, "Quiet, boy." He pressed his ear to the hatch and listened. The wind outside had picked up again, screaming through the eaves, shaking the walls. Then, gunfire. 3 sharp cracks, then silence. Grace's hand tightened on his sleeve. "Ethan, stay down." The storm howled, snow hammering the roof in furious rhythm. And for the first time that night, Ethan smiled grimly. "Looks like the mountain chose a side," he said. Above them, thunder rolled, and the blizzard returned, wild, relentless, swallowing every trace of their enemies into its white fury. The mountain held its breath. Somewhere above the snow-buried cabin, the world was still. Too still. Ethan Cole pressed his back against the wall of the underground shelter, listening. Only the low hum of wind filtered through the vents, mingling with the faint rhythm of Grace's heartbeat beside him. The lantern between them flickered, painting trembling halos of gold across steel and skin. Hours had passed since Harlan's men vanished into the trees, but silence could be a trap as deadly as bullets. Ethan had learned that long ago in foreign deserts, where calm meant someone was aiming. "Do you think they're gone?" Grace whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No one like Harlan walks away without finishing what he started. He's up there waiting for the next move. And so are we." Rex growled softly, nose pressed to the floor. The big German shepherd had not closed his eyes once. Every muscle in his body was alert, coiled. Near him, 3 tiny shapes slept against a blanket. The puppies, warm and unaware of the world's cruelty. The smallest, Sable, stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Grace reached down, soothing it with her fingers. For a moment, watching her, Ethan saw the woman beyond the uniform. Someone whose heart had been broken by betrayal, yet still reached instinctively to protect life. It was a strange kind of courage, softer than his own, but stronger for it. He stood, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. "We can't stay underground forever. If we do, we die here." Grace looked up, exhaustion shadowing her face. "What do you suggest?" "They're armed. We're not exactly an army." "Then we don't fight like one," Ethan said. "We let the mountain fight for us." He climbed the ladder, cracked open the hatch, and peered out. The world above had turned gray and ghostly. The wind carried fine powder snow, swirling like smoke. Storm clouds were gathering again on the horizon, thick, heavy, and moving fast. "Another blizzard's rolling in," he murmured. Grace joined him, pulling on her coat. "You think it'll help?" "It'll hide us, maybe blind them, and if I'm lucky, it'll erase every track on this mountain." They climbed out together. The cold slapped their faces, raw and biting. Snow reached their knees as they trudged toward the ridge. The sky had that eerie color that comes before catastrophe, a bruised violet fading into white. Rex bounded ahead, tail stiff, testing the air. He barked once, sharp and urgent. Ethan froze. Through the veil of snow, he spotted movement. Dark figures at the tree line, moving low, coordinated. His stomach sank. "They're flanking," he muttered. Grace's hand went instinctively to her pistol. "Then we don't have much time." "Inside," Ethan ordered. "Get the dogs below, now." But before she could move, a voice cut through the storm. Cold, smooth, unmistakable. "Cole!" Ethan turned. Victor Harlan stood halfway down the slope, wrapped in a thick parka, his rifle lowered but ready. His men fanned out behind him, their visors reflecting the dull light. "I told you I'd be back," Harlan said. His tone was almost conversational, as if he were greeting an old comrade instead of cornering prey. "You should have left her for dead. You'd still be breathing easy." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you." Harlan's smile was razor thin. "Let's not make this messy. Hand her over. I'll make sure they find your body with honor. A tragic accident in the storm." Grace stepped beside Ethan, her pistol raised. "You'll have to earn that honor, Captain." Harlan's expression hardened. "Still defiant. You never learned when to quit." Lightning cracked somewhere in the distance, not fire, but ice colliding in the sky. The wind howled, carrying snow that whipped between them like shards of glass. Ethan took a slow breath, voice steady. "You hear that, Harlan? The mountain's speaking, and it doesn't like liars." For a second, neither man moved. Then Harlan's finger twitched. The first shot split the air. Ethan dove sideways, dragging Grace down behind a fallen tree. Bullets tore through the snow, splintering bark and ice. "Stay low!" Ethan shouted, firing back. The muzzle flash lit the storm like lightning. Rex barked furiously, leaping toward the slope, his instincts overriding fear. The shepherd disappeared into the white chaos, a blur of muscle and fury. Grace's heart hammered as she reloaded, hands shaking. "He's going to kill him!" "He's not the one I'd bet against," Ethan said. Rex lunged at one of Harlan's men, knocking him flat. A scream cut through the wind, then silence. Two more gunmen advanced, firing blindly through the whiteout. Ethan moved fast, circling behind them. His boots crunched on ice. His breath was loud in his ears. He tackled the nearest one, wrenching the rifle away and slamming the man into the snow. "Drop it!" he barked. The gunman hesitated, too long. Ethan struck once, hard. The man went down. The storm roared louder, devouring sound and sight alike. Grace crawled through the snow toward the cabin, clutching the puppies bundled in her coat. She felt the cold biting into her bones, but kept moving, every step a prayer. Behind her, gunfire faded into muffled echoes. Ethan reappeared moments later, blood streaking his sleeve, but eyes alive. He grabbed her arm. "Down the hatch!" They climbed into the shelter again, just as thunder shook the ridge. The storm had turned into a wall of white, so thick it swallowed the mountains themselves. Inside, the world was a dim cocoon of heat and heartbeat. Grace sank against the wall, shaking. "You're hit." "Just a scratch," Ethan said, though his arm dripped crimson. She tore a strip from her sleeve, pressing it to the wound. "You saved us again." He met her eyes, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. "No, we saved each other." Rex crawled down the ladder, covered in snow and mud, one ear torn but his tail still wagging. He nuzzled Ethan's knee, then collapsed beside the pups, panting heavily. Grace stroked his head, whispering, "Good boy, you're our miracle." Above them, the storm howled like a living thing, a wild, vengeful spirit sweeping across the mountain. It tore through the tree line, uprooting trunks, burying machines, silencing engines. Hours passed, gunfire never returned. When the wind finally began to fade, only the mountain's sigh remained, a long, mournful exhale. Ethan climbed back up, pushing open the hatch. The night had turned still again. Snow glowed under the pale shimmer of the moon, untouched, endless. He stepped out and scanned the slope. There were no bodies, no tracks, only the storm's final mercy, erasure. Grace joined him, wrapping her coat tighter. "Do you think they're dead?" "Maybe. Or maybe the mountain just took them somewhere they can't hurt anyone again." She stared at the sky, where the aurora faintly shimmered, green and blue like bruised light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "For once, it's quiet," Ethan said. They stood side by side, the cold biting their cheeks but not their hearts. Behind them, the cabin was half buried in snow, its chimney still breathing thin curls of smoke, a signal to anyone watching from heaven that some souls had survived the storm. Rex padded to Ethan's side, nudging his hand. The puppies huddled near the fire inside, safe and alive. Ethan looked at Grace. "When the feds come, we hand over the proof. We tell them everything. After that?" "After that?" she asked softly. "I go where the snow still falls, but maybe not so hard." Grace smiled faintly. "And if another storm finds you?" "Then I'll listen for the bark." A gust of wind swept across the ridge, carrying with it the fading echo of that promise. Below, the mountain slept once more, its secrets buried, its heroes breathing, its silence sacred. The blizzard had broken overnight. By morning, the storm had turned to mist, thin veils of vapor drifting across the frozen valley as if the mountain were exhaling after holding its breath too long. The first rays of sunlight glinted off the snow, dazzling and pure, making it hard to imagine that just hours before, the world had been filled with gunfire and death. Ethan Cole stood on the ridge above Fairhaven, rifle slung over his back, blood still dried along his sleeve. The silence around him was heavy but peaceful. He could feel the mountains settling again, reclaiming what had been disturbed. Below, the cabin looked like a half-buried relic, smoke curling gently from its chimney, a survivor in a land of ghosts. Behind him, Rex padded through the snow, limping slightly on one paw but holding his head high. His breath steamed in the cold, and his fur glowed like bronze in the sunlight. A few steps away, Grace Monroe emerged from the cabin, wrapped in Ethan's old coat. Her cheeks were flushed with life again, her hair loose, her eyes bright in the pale morning. "They're here," she said softly, looking toward the sky. Ethan turned. In the distance, the sound came faintly at first, a steady thrum that grew until the air vibrated. A black helicopter cut through the clouds, its insignia shining silver in the sun. FBI Tactical Division. Ethan's hand tightened on Rex's collar. "It's about time." Grace smiled, the kind of smile that carried exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "You did it. You kept us alive." He shook his head. "We all did." The helicopter touched down in a swirl of snow. Armed agents spilled out, their dark uniforms a sharp contrast to the white wilderness. At their head was Dana Reeves, tall, sharp-featured, with silver hair tucked beneath her hood. Her voice carried easily across the clearing. "Cole, you always did pick the coldest hellholes to hide in." Ethan grinned faintly. "You never did like the tropics." She strode forward, stopping just short of him. "You look like hell," she said. "Hell's overrated," Ethan replied. Then her expression softened as she looked past him to Grace and the 3 puppies huddled near the doorway. "Officer Monroe," Grace nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Dana's gaze shifted between the 2 of them, her tone turning professional. "We received your transmission in the encrypted file this morning. The data matches ongoing federal investigations. Victor Harlan and his men are in custody. What's left of them? You did more than survive, Grace. You broke open a case the Bureau's been chasing for years." Grace exhaled, her breath visible in the cold. "So, it's finally over." Dana gave a small nod. "For him, yes. For you, it's just beginning. Washington wants you to head the new Internal Corruption Task Force. You'll have full jurisdiction." Grace blinked. "Me? Who better?" Dana said simply. "You've seen what rot looks like from the inside. Now you get to burn it out." Ethan watched the exchange quietly, his expression unreadable. Dana turned to him. "And you, Cole? The Bureau still has a file with your name on it. We could use someone like you. Off the record, maybe. You're still breathing, which is more than most of my field agents can claim." Ethan smirked. "I think I've done enough dying for one lifetime." She smiled faintly. "That's what you said last time." The wind picked up, stirring loose flakes of snow between them. Grace stepped closer, the faintest tremor in her voice. "You could come with us, Ethan. There's a place for people like you. People who don't quit when it matters." He met her eyes. "Maybe. But I've never been good at standing still. Someone has to keep watch for the next storm." Rex barked softly beside him, as if in agreement. Dana extended a small case, the lockbox Ethan had buried beneath the floor. Your safe kept its promise. The micro SD card was inside, untouched. It'll serve as official evidence in Harlan's trial. Ethan took it, then handed it to Grace. "Yours," he said simply. "You risked everything to protect it." She stared at the box, then at him. "You risked more." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's what happens when you start caring again." From the helicopter, an agent called out, "We're ready to lift, ma'am." Dana gestured for Grace to board, but the young officer hesitated. She looked back toward Ethan. "If you ever come down from these mountains," he cut her off gently, "you'll know where to find me." For a moment, they stood there, 2 survivors bound by a storm, both changed by it. Then Grace stepped onto the helicopter, cradling one of the puppies in her arms. The others followed, tails wagging uncertainly. As the rotor blades began to spin, Ethan raised a hand in farewell. Grace's voice carried faintly over the roar of the engine. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." The helicopter lifted, climbing into the pale sky. Snow whirled around it, then settled again, as if the mountain itself were closing the chapter. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching the dark speck fade into the horizon. Then he looked down at Rex. The shepherd tilted his head, waiting. "Well, partner," Ethan said softly, "looks like it's just you and me again." Rex barked once, sharp and bright, the sound echoing down the valley. They turned toward the forest, where sunlight filtered through the pines, scattering diamonds across the snow. The mountains stretched before them, endless and quiet. But for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel lost in it. He felt at home. As they walked, the wind carried the faint echo of the past night's storm, the roar of battle, the cry of the helpless, the whisper of redemption, and beneath it all, a promise that even in the coldest places, justice still finds its way. They're through. 1 year later, spring touched Fairhaven like a benediction. Snow melted from the slopes, rivers thawed, and life returned in green shoots and birdsong. In the heart of town, a new building stood where an abandoned station once lay. Fairhaven K-9 Training Center, its flag fluttering proudly in the wind. Inside, Grace Monroe, now wearing the badge of a federal division chief, stood on the training field. 3 full-grown shepherds, Rex's offspring, moved in perfect formation under her command. Among them, Sable led the group, sleek and strong, her eyes as bright as her mother's. A car pulled up near the gate. Grace turned and froze. Ethan stood there, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his beard trimmed, his eyes clear for the first time in years. Rex sat beside him, older now, muzzle graying but still proud. Grace smiled. "You finally came down from the mountain." Ethan chuckled. Couldn't let the kids graduate without seeing their old man. She walked toward him, sunlight glinting off her badge. "They're yours too, you know. You taught them what loyalty means." Ethan knelt beside Sable, scratching her ears. "Looks like she learned it better than most people ever will." Grace's voice softened. "So what now?" He stood, looking out toward the horizon, where the last of the snow still glimmered atop distant peaks. "Now, maybe I'll find a place where the world's still quiet, and the storms don't scare me anymore." Grace smiled. "If one ever finds you, Ethan—" He nodded. "I'll listen for the bark." She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "And if it's mine?" He looked at her, the ghost of a smile in his eyes. "Then I'll come running." The wind shifted, carrying the sound of the dogs' barks across the valley, a chorus of life, strength, and something close to grace. Rex raised his head, let out a long, proud howl, and for a moment, it seemed the whole mountain answered. It was not the sound of mourning, but of freedom, of loyalty that outlived death, of a bond that storms could not break. And in that echo, Ethan Cole heard what he had been chasing for years, not the end of war, but the beginning of peace. Sometimes God's miracles do not come with thunder or blinding light. They come quietly through the hearts of those who choose compassion over fear. Ethan, Grace, and Rex were not saved by luck, but by love, courage, and faith that refused to give up even in the coldest storm. In our own lives, we all face winters that test our strength, but if we keep faith, God will always send light through the people and moments we least expect. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Today, leave a comment to tell us where you are watching from, and type "Amen" if you believe God's love can guide us through every storm. May God bless you and your family with peace and strength always. And remember to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and miracles.